I really thank you for honoring our invitation. This morning, we are gathered here to launch the second phase of the Dicto awareness campaign, following the one that we did for merchants 2 years ago. This campaign will be much wider than the one we did in November 2017. We intend to engage the e-payment service providers, the consumers, as well as merchants. So special thanks to the payment industry that agreed to partner with us in this campaign towards the Cashless Rwanda. We all know it's not easy to change behavior in a day, but with commitment and collaboration from the people seated in this room and other stakeholders, I have confidence that this is doable. Ladies and gentlemen, a decade ago, the idea of transitioning Rwanda to a cashless economy would have been unthinkable. But with technology revolution and a world where the internet has taken over, the turning point to a digital-led and enabled economy is now. Today, with technology evolving at breakneck speed, payment services and other financial products across the world are becoming fully digitized. For example, it's now much easier to transact using mobile phones, personal computers, various types of payment cards, and many other electronic devices than using the traditional means. The Dicto payment system is important because it enhances the efficiency of the financial system and the economy as a whole. It also promotes financial inclusion as it facilitates easy access to financial services. Further to this, we also know that digital payments eases financial transactions, lowers the risk that goes with the use of traditional payment means, reduces transaction costs like trips to stores and banks, to mention but a few. Ladies and gentlemen, that said, as we gather here today, we ask ourselves, how can we fast-track Rwanda's cashless journey? It has not been easy, and we still have a long way to go, but the good news is that we have a good story to tell. Rwanda's cashless journey has been progressive, with Dicto financial services increasing over time. Over the last 8 years, the value of e-payments to GDP increased from 0.3% in 2011 to 34.6% in 2019. And retail payment services have kept growing due to the adoption of new technologies and easy access to payment systems by customers. As of June 2019, traditional points of sale machines using cards had increased to 3,046, compared to 2,800 in 2018 and 227 in 2011. But the exciting story here is the introduction of new types of points of sale since 2017 that are easy and almost costless to deploy. These include the virtual points of sale like the QR code, near-field communication points of sale like Tap and Go, and the mobile points of sale like the merchant number. In 1 year, they increased to 10,761, and by June this year, they have increased to 14,000 points of sale. Another big milestone in the use of Dicto financial services was the introduction of micro-Dicto savings and microloans. Dicto loans increased in volume by 270%, from 99,000 worth 1.9 billion in 2017 to a volume of 367,000 loans in June 2019 worth 14.2 billion. This has doubled the number of individuals accessing loans through formal financial services within just 1 year. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the above commendable achievements, the Rwandan payment industry is still facing challenges ranging from limited number of touch points in terms of POSs, agents and merchants, existing payment terminals concentrated in urban areas, high cost of payment services, both cards and mobile financial services, low level of acceptance of e-payment devices by merchants, cash-based culture in the Rwandan population, low financial literacy, limited interoperability between providers. To address these challenges, there's need to further develop systems and structures that will foster a cashless economy. In 2018, the Cabinet approved the Rwanda Payment System Strategy 2018-2024, and one of the strategic objectives of this strategy, among others, is to foster an enabling environment for innovation in the payment system, calling for collaboration between the public and private sector to promote better access, adoption, and usage of digital financial services and products. This strategy highlights that financial awareness and education are key enablers that must continuously be carried out to ensure Rwandans understand the benefits of using non-cash means for their financial transactions. Also, to ensure that information shared on various electronic payment systems is easy to understand and options for conducting transactions are affordable, safe, and secure. Safe and secure, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, it is against this backdrop that today we come back with the second phase of the digital payments awareness campaign that targets both consumers and merchants. We intend to have targeted messages over several media channels, but also physically engage different audiences of consumers like workers in their workplaces. The campaign will aim at encouraging the workforce and other categories of consumers to embrace e-payments. Of course, this will require merchants to accept e-payments in their businesses, and more so, the payment service providers to promote electronic payment channels that are cost-effective and are user-friendly, even to the segment of our population that are less literate. In addition to this awareness campaign, BNR and other stakeholders commit to working together to ensure security of payment systems, reduction in the chances of duplication by promoting interoperability, and I confirm that the government of Rwanda is committed to promoting the interoperability suite that has been in the pipeline. So we hope by mid-next year we need to be having this operational. We also intend to increase the number of places at which customers can transact electronically and guarantee that systems are operating 24/7. As I conclude, I welcome all Rwandans to join this campaign as we embark on a journey of encouraging the nation to go cashless. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Honorable Governor. And as he has mentioned, the Governor, as we discuss the cashless payment journey this morning, we continue to ask ourselves, in order to fast-track Rwanda's cashless journey, what measures are needed to speed up the adoption of digital form of payment and encourage consumers plus merchants to use them in our everyday lives? And to answer these questions, we have a panel discussion, and I would like to invite our moderator this morning, Jean-Claude Gaga, the CEO of R-Switch, to introduce to us this panel. Welcome, Gaga.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Honorable Governor, for this opportunity. and welcome everyone. I think we've already heard from the governor, and this is not a speech, but my role is quite simple. I'm going to introduce a panel of eminent persons here. They are experts in the field to address a couple of these challenges the governor just pointed out. And so our discussion, the objective here will just simply be to draw a general picture of the national payment landscape in Rwanda. And then we'll need to identify some of the key actions and see how we can fast-track adoption of other non-cash payment means. So our discussions will be addressing this fundamental theme. In order to fast-track Rwanda's cashless journey, what measures are needed to accelerate the adoption of digital form of payment and encourage consumers and merchants to use them for everyday spending? Just before I introduce the panel, I just want, as they move to the stage, I want them to bear in mind a couple of points I picked from the governor's speech. On the positive side, we heard of the statistics, e-payments as a percentage of GDP moving from 0.4 to 34%, what it is today. That is on the positive side. On the growth of POSs from 227 in 2011 to the current 3,000. The growth of microloans, the digital loans, from 1.1 billion to 14 billion. This on the positive side. But I would rather request that you dwell so much on the challenges, some of which I just want to highlight again. He mentions of the limited POS, there's a point of sale or any points of payment or touch points, the high cost of digital financial services, low level of acceptance, cash-based culture, low literacy, and limited interoperability. Now, with me to discuss some of these challenges and see how far we can go from here, I want to introduce the following. And in no particular order, but probably by way of importance, I want to introduce first Mr. Damien Dizeye, who is the Executive Secretary of ADECO Rwanda. ADECO is the Rwanda Consumers' Rights Protection Organization. Mr. Damien, please come forward and take the very last seats to your extreme right. Round of, please, let's welcome him to the stage. Thank you. Next, again, probably the most solicited in the room is Ms. Mitwa Kaemba Ngambi. She's the CEO of MTN Rwanda. 1 week in Rwanda, you're most welcome. Next, I want to introduce a very important man in the room who has a couple of hats, but the hat we'll be wearing at the panel today, you'll be speaking as the chairperson of the Rwanda Bankers Association, Mr. Maurice Toroitich. He also doubles as the CEO of BPR Atlas Mara. That's why I said he has a couple of hats. You're most welcome, to Maurice. I want also to welcome Mr. John Karamuka, who is the Director of Payment Systems at the National Bank of Rwanda, who will also be giving us some insights on what regulation is doing to fast-track digital payments in Rwanda. You're most welcome, John. And sparing the best for last, this is Mr. Eric Rugigamba, who is the Director General of the Financial Sector Development at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. You're most welcome, Eric. Let's just ensure all our mics are on by just tapping. Once again, you're most welcome to this panel. And as I mentioned, probably still going in the order of how we came to the stage, I want to give the floor to Damien Dizeye, who I believe his voice should be listened to more than anyone here, be it those in the audience, and those obviously up here. They'll definitely be paying more attention to what he has to say. So Damien is speaking on behalf of the consumers in Rwanda. So consumers as beneficiaries of payment services, especially digital payment services, and also key stakeholders to ensure the adoption of the same. What would you say are your expectations from almost everyone on the panel? There's a service provider, from the MNOs to the banks, there's the regulator, there's a government representative, and all the other stakeholders in the room. What would you say are your expectations from all these?
Thank you, Gaga. As you said, I'm Ndize Damien, the Executive Secretary of the Rwanda Consumers' Rights Protection Organization. Our expectation is that, first of all, I would like to thank the government of Rwanda that has made significant investments in digital financial services. And also, the challenges, I have some issues related to some complaints from consumers. Some of them is how consumers see digital financial services in Rwanda. One, the service providers have a role to educate consumers. One, you know that consumers have a right of choice, have rights of safe and affordable products. Consumers have rights to satisfy basic needs. So, consumers, some of them deny or refuse to enter, to access to digital financial services because they don't have a good services from service providers. One, sometimes there is network downtime. Again, if you go to ATM machine, some complaint related to ATM machine is that in the weekend, a financial institution, they put a small amount of banknotes in the ATM machine. And consumers, when they want to withdraw money, they have to withdraw several times to have the amount they need. And again, for regulators and the government and other stakeholders, they have to invest more on consumer education. For regulators, you have day-to-day to monitor how service providers have to comply with rules and regulation in place. Because without regulation, service providers will not achieve this journey of cashless economy. Cashless economy is good for all of us. But if consumers are not educated, if users are not educated, nothing will be done. So for us as consumers, we need to be educated. And again, for people with disabilities, there is no infrastructure for them. They need to have what can I call braille to help them to use those digital financial services. And again, we know that a big market we have is women. Women don't enter in the system. We don't know why, because of some of them, perhaps they're not educated. because of literacy. Digital literacy, digital education is more needed at the market rather than for educated people. We see that digital financial services are in town, far to rural area, remote area. So we need service providers to put or to invest more in financial in rural area where people with low income can access to digital financial services.
Thank you so much, Damir. Quite a couple of points here. So poor service, network outage as an example for the service providers, consumer education remaining low, compliance enforcement not at its best, infrastructure for people with disability as an example, that is something they need to look into, gender representation, especially for women, as well as access, especially in rural areas. I want to skip the service providers, so you internalize some of these issues, and just come straight to government. The voice of government here being Mr. Eric Rugigamba. Last year, we know that Cabinet passed this strategy that includes, to a great extent, some of the digital payment services that we intend to look into and see how the adoption can grow. Can you just enlighten us on some of the pillars of this and probably how the journey has been in terms of implementing this strategy?
Thank you so much, Gaga. Good morning, everyone. The strategy was developed, and I might thank everyone in the room and those who are not here that took part in the process of developing the strategy. Full participation, full ownership at that level, and finally it was approved by the cabinet. And ideally, the strategy is, the objective was more to ensure that we leverage on technology and payments, digital payment services to be able to accelerate economic growth. Try to use the technology to drive financial inclusion. We really believe that it's until when you look at technology as an enabler to be a key component of everyone's livelihood, it's when we'll be able to probably celebrate the journey that we want to achieve. The key pillars were basically there were 5. And the pillars generally were to look at the whole ecosystem to ensure that whoever wants to act in this space is well facilitated. And just to run through key of them, one was to look at the legal and the regulatory framework, to look at if there's any legal instrument that is needed to provide the environment that all actors would want. That should be taken into account. A number of them were highlighted, and the process of working on that is underway. We also wanted to, the strategy wanted to look at the capacity of the regulators. The regulators of some of these innovative services and providers, services and products that are coming on the market. We need to drive and push as many as we can on the market, but at the same time, we ensure that the sector and the financial systems are sound and with high integrity. The other pillar was more to do, how do we ensure that the cashless journey is well facilitated in terms of the service points, let it be physical like POS, but also it can be virtual, and the internet and the mobile services. How do we ensure that I think the issue that you were touched on in terms of accessibility, they are not only restricted to urban centers, but also take them down to rural areas. A lot of issues were also saying, if you want to drive this journey, could there be some policies, especially taxes regarding e-payment that should be looked into? And I think a discussion was very interesting to see some of those areas that we think the government should look at some of those tax policies. And the government remains committed to look at that, even after or during the implementation of the strategy. Happy to engage at any level and try to pick them. What you want is to ensure that the environment is a bit conducive. So a number of other areas that would help in this journey was, I think, to say, should the government play maybe a key role here to be the first to lead in this process? And I think we have seen that in the government trying to look at all the people to government and government to people services being done electronically. The journey is very impressive. There's a lot to be done, especially at the back end. And I think with the feeling that if we get the government to lead the process, probably, and the government being the key actor in the economy, probably that would also facilitate. So a number of those issues were touched on. I cannot forget the financial education and awareness, which should be, and I think the strategy is clear, whose role should it be? I think gone are the days when people thought that it should be the government to do that. And I think what the strategy tried to do is to spell out the role for everyone, including someone at the head of a family, including the civil society, the media, the providers of these services. So it's quite intensive. I don't want to get into details. The third pillar was really to say, how do we ensure that the environment is fertile for innovators? At the end of the day, the cashless should be, probably should be facilitated through innovative solutions that keep on emerging every day. How do we ensure that the environment we are in facilitates that and enables that to happen? And issues around interoperability, instead of having one agent or service or one agent that is having 5 POSs, which all cost money, each has requires some knowledge, requires some cash to be used. All these issues, and probably that's where the issue of interoperability at the national level emerged, and it's part of the strategy, and a number of other things where we try to ensure that innovation is encouraged. The fourth one was really to say, so we have the consumers, we have the service providers. How do we ensure that all these service providers, including the MFIs and SACCOs, are allowed to be participating in the national payment system to allow the process to happen and serve the consumers very well? These issues were all laid out into the strategy. And the definite issues of pricing, transparency, and the suitable products, these are very much so emphasized in the strategy. And the last pillar was to say, is all that done and is the payment system efficient? Is it of integrity? Is it on real time? So a lot of activities and actions were laid out in the strategy to address that. And since then, since it was approved by the cabinet, an implementation plan was developed, spelling out all the actions and activities to be implemented and how they should be actually monitored and measured with specific indicators on each of them. And specific institutions were assigned on each of them, and some of them are from the government, Minister of ICT, Minister and Innovation, Minister of Finance and the Justice, but also the private sector, the service providers, the regulators. So everyone has a part to play, and I think for me, starting this journey today is also an opportunity to emphasize the fact that this is not a game, this is not a journey that can be achieved by one segment. It should be all of us, including the consumers, to take interest in some of these issues. And probably later on I will touch on some of the milestones that have been achieved so far, and the way I look at how the future should be looking like.
Thank you, Eric. And indeed, I was going to say we need to hear next how you're tracking the various players that you just mentioned. When you track them, are they really performing based on certain set KPIs? So probably will come in later. I want to skip the two gentlemen and go back to MTN as a service provider now. Listening to what Damir just mentioned, we are talking of digitizing these services and ensuring they can reach the typical Rwandan deep in the villages. We are leveraging technology to pass on these services. When it comes to fair treatment, which is something that you mentioned, fair treatment of customers, considering that today information is transmitted through a mobile phone, for instance, by way of USSD, would you say you're being fair to them and you're being transparent and you're giving them, a fair share of the service, considering the form into which it is transmitted being electronic? Are you treating them fairly? If not, what are the measures that will ensure that they feel that they are getting a fair share of the treatment?
Thanks, Gaga. And I would like to also thank you for the opportunity for coming to have a chat with you all. Like you mentioned when he was introducing me, I'm 1 week in the country, really excited to be here. And in as much as I'm sharing thoughts from the mobile industry, I'm also taking this as a learning experience. So thank you from both sides to share and also for the learning experience. I picked out quite a few things from what Damien said as far as consumer expectations are concerned. And I will come to fair treatment and transparency in a minute. But one of the things that he raised was around the need for us to provide a secure and reliable platform to ensure that consumers have a trust in the service that we provide. And I just wanted to dwell a bit upon that because we as MTN now having almost 20% of the population of Rwanda transacting on our mobile money platform have invested quite a lot of time and effort and resources in ensuring that the platform we provide is secure and reliable. For instance, through the regulation also as advised to us, we have ensured that our platforms are geographically redundant. And what that means is that if, for instance, by any technological glitch, one platform is out of service, automatically the other platform can take on transactions. So that way, you wouldn't have consumers engaging in a service and realizing that the service is not available. So we've invested quite a bit in ensuring redundancy of our platforms. As far as security is concerned, we ourselves hold ourselves accountable to international standards. So you see a lot of emphasis around certifications, for instance, PADSS, which is a Payment Application Security Standard, which ensures that everything that is expected out of a mobile money platform, we are adhering to. Going into next year, we're also going to be looking at things like GSMA certifications, just so we can ensure that the service that we're providing is up to international standard. Within the organization, and not only here in Rwanda, across our entire group footprint, there's also a huge emphasis, most recently, around information security, because especially as, cybersecurity threats are evolving almost every single day, we literally have a team every single day trying to understand what our vulnerabilities are and ensuring that there are no gaps that exist, because this is people's cash that we're talking about. And we need to ensure that this environment is secure. When it comes to things like transparency and what consumers expect out of information, education, initiatives, things like that, I'm sure all of us in this room are customers of one service provider or another. I do hope that everybody's a customer of MTN Mobile Money, and I'd like to hear the experiences that you've had. But I think first and foremost, as customers of any service provider, what we're looking to see is, do I understand that the product that I'm being provided and are pricing, terms and conditions readily available? And of course, I can sit here and talk about, yes, we have provided information over radio, over TV, et cetera, but I think we all know that it's not everybody, one, who can read an SMS that is sent by the mobile operators. It's not everybody who has access to a TV. It's not everybody who has access to radio. So we have invested a lot also in ensuring that our agent footprint is well spread across the country, because essentially this agent footprint is an extension of MTN. Today we have about 30,000 agents across the entire country, and we rely a lot on them also to help us educate the consumers with whom they're in close proximity with. So in as much as we have the traditional communication channels, we have also really focused on educating our merchant channel, because they're the ones who are in front of the consumer. And we also receive quite consistent feedback from them as well. So some of the things that you, Damien, raised, and I think in your preamble, Gaga, you raised, around concerns from merchants, all of that, we've also created a very consistent channel that flow of information into us. So we are always evolving with the needs of our consumers. In supporting the merchant environment as well, as you all know, we have a call center that you can call when you dial 100. But for mobile money specifically, we've gone slightly a step further. If, for instance, an MTN mobile money merchant or agent is trying to contact us through the call center, their calls are prioritized because we understand potentially they're calling us because they're trying to resolve a query that is being presented to them in real time. So we've prioritized their calls within the call center. And some of the things that we'll be looking to doing going into next year as well is also prioritizing consumers' calls for those people who call into the call center. I think also, before I wrap up, I mean, with anything in life, I believe, and talking about education, with anything in life, I believe, you know, the more you do it, the more you know how to do it. So we are also obsessed about creating several use cases for mobile money. And there are plenty, you know. I mean, a few months ago, we enabled the very first cashless ticketing at the expo with PSF. And we believe it's where we plant ourselves in the day-to-day operations of daily life that the more consumers are faced or enabled to use mobile money, the more they will learn how to use it. So we're really excited about the various opportunities that we have. I know we're in conjunction, we work with CBA, we work with a lot of people in this room as far as creating those various use cases are concerned. We're having a chat, for instance, with the Visa Country Director to say, how is it that we can collaborate a whole lot more? As service providers, especially MTN, our obsession is not about increasing our share of the pie. Our obsession is about increasing the pie so the entire market can grow. And you'll see a whole lot more collaborations going forward from us as well.
Thank you, Mitwa. I want to bounce off more or less the same question to Maurice, but I want you to expound more and look at some of the issues that Damien mentioned. For instance, I can't help but be kind of siding with Damien on most of these, especially around consumers with low levels of financial and technological capabilities. How are you addressing some of these clients within the banking halls or other different touch points that you're serving them? And probably touch a bit on the mode of, when they have claims and disputes. How are they able to reach you? Are they able to reach you within time? How do you facilitate? What are the SLAs looking like?
Thank you, Gaga. And thank you, everyone. So if I pick from where Mitwa just spoke about in terms of what the mobile money companies are doing, and I reflect that to what banks are doing, which is the institutions that I represent on this stage, is that even though it is very easy, and I believe truly that banks have made the digital payment options available to all types of customers, and therefore the notion of discrimination, favoritism, or injustice in the offering of those services may not really be said to be the situation. However, I think in terms of the way that our customers access these channels today, my observation is that we still have a lot to do as banks. And it is always about which is the easiest way to be able to get the information to our customers in order for them, one, to understand what is available, which channels are available, what can they use, but also to make them comfortable to be able to use these channels as they have been designed for them to use. Now, a very practical situation, which I think banks, and I can speak for several that I know do this already, is that the way to do it the best is literally to show people how to do it. And I think in most of the banks today, inside the banking halls, you have customer service people who literally have the responsibility of, one, registering customers to these mobile channels, but also taking them through the nitty-gritty of how it works, demonstrating to customers how it works, and giving them information about who they might be able to contact in case they run into a problem. I think the challenge, though, is to make sure that this is something that is pervasive, that is consistent, that is reliable in terms of being able to deliver on the processes as have been set in the various banks in Rwanda today. When you think about particularly situations where customers experience problems even when they try to do it. Our experience is that when customers fail the first time to reach the end of a transaction, particularly those that are not confident in using these new channels, they shy away from repeating because they think that it doesn't work, when in fact, the only thing that has happened really is that they have missed out a step in the process of making a payment. And so the challenge that we have as banks today is to be able to identify those bottlenecks in the process and have internal processes and systems and procedures that helps the internal staff and the external customer to know where to go when such a thing happens, and obviously also making sure that they're resolved quickly. Because what we are dealing with here is competition with cash. Cash never fails at the point of transaction. The only time cash fails at a point of transaction is if the good that is being bought is not available. And so it's a question of how we as stakeholders, both banks, service providers, support institutions like regulators, can ensure that the environment under which digital payments are being offered is such that there is a very high level of dependence or dependability, if I may say so, for our customers to try the first time, feel confident that it works, and for them to be able to repeat a second and a third time, because then that creates the experience. And once one customer has that experience, then what happens is that the word of mouth spreads. You know, the one thing that I have learned, having been in Rwanda for a fairly long time now, is that people trust more what is told to them by word of mouth than what is written. And so the big challenge is how to really get down to them, you know, and speak to them at their place of work, at their place of business, and demonstrate how it works physically. Do a real transaction with them and actually help them to do it themselves up until the point where they feel confident in doing it. And that obviously that requires a lot of investment in terms of the people to do it, in terms of the training of the people to do it, because it's one thing to have someone to do it, but actually how to be able to engage with the customer well to do it. And I believe a lot of banks are doing that today because only until when we have a critical mass of people who are performing their transactions on the digital channels that we can say then that the base upon which other financial services may be provided has been attained. Initially, and we are all commercial in the way we look at these things, it might not look profitable because the expenditure always happens before the transactions happen, before the revenues happen. But I think, like in most cases, we've seen that the initial stages of investment usually, will pay off in the long run. And if you think about way back in 2011, when digital payments only represented 0.3% of GDP, I mean, if we all said that time that we will not invest because it doesn't make sense in terms of profits, then we would not be realizing the benefits that we are seeing today. So in terms of availability, in terms of the types of channels, in terms of access, I would say yes, there's very strong intentions, but there's still a lot of bottlenecks certainly to be unlocked in the way that the service is being provided, in resolving issues that customers encounter on a day-to-day basis, and actually in making the channels user-friendly and accessible to them, so that even those that are visually impaired might be able to use their mobile phones. I know a customer in this city who actually does that. Not because of a particular problem, but it's really because the customer is interested to do it, and there are devices that can actually do that today. There are mobile phones that have Braille, and customers can be able to transact in that sense. So very good progress, very good intentions, but there's still a lot of work that we all can do in that process, which calls for all stakeholders to participate and play their role actively to achieve what is possible for all of us to achieve.
Okay, thank you, Maurice. We agree with you on the investment, but we never get to hear about the revenues much later. But again, that's a discussion for another day. Just before I jump in onto the regulator now, who actually knows some of these secrets, I wanted to allow the audience that will also have a chance to send your questions forward. So please prepare immediately after John speaks about the regulatory approach as well, to also forward your questions. So coming to John now as the Director of Payments, you sit on so many secrets, as I was saying, including issues around confidence, issues around customer data, you know. I was reading one of the reports, I think it's a 2018 report on the adoption of global mobile payments. And on the barriers of mobile adoption, they were saying 70% of consumers actually do not use mobile services because they lack confidence. And 40% it is because of security. This brings in the trust issue, which I believe is one of the crucial roles that you play as a regulator. How do you ensure that this user trust, you know, is built and is taken forward by even the service providers to ensure it reaches us, the consumers and the people that Dami is speaking for? And while you still have the microphone, I wanted also to expound more on how you're working with other, you know, regional regulators to discussions around data protection, service, security, and all, so that, you know, you can expound more on this. Thank you. It's on, I think.
Thank you very much, Gaga. I think you have raised a good, and this was also raised by my colleagues here, panelists here, on trust and confidence. And the confidence and the trust is very important, or are very important, because they are different, by the way, when it comes to financial services in general, but also payment services in particular. I'm saying this because when we are talking about payment services here, the transaction or payment transaction are totally different from other economic transactions because of different reasons. Maybe some of them, this transaction is about, or payment services is about relationship, is about the relationship between the consumer and the service provider. It's about the acceptability of those services. It's also important to tell that when you're talking about digital payment or payment in general, we are talking about money, and this is about trust. So whatever we are doing, being service providers, financial service providers, or being regulators, whatever we are doing is to make sure that we build that trust and confidence. Consumers must trust their service providers. They must have confidence in the services we provide. In terms of regulatory initiatives, I can say, first of all, we regulate for 3 objectives. First of all, is about to ensure stability, ensure that the institution providing these services are stable and sound. Second is also to ensure that people don't abuse these services in terms of financial integrity, but also consumer protection. So come back to what we are doing. I think when you look at the last 5 or so years, 5 years or so, we've been having different regulatory reforms aiming at really building that trust, building that confidence, and incentivize the service providers to really provide a higher quality of services. So if I give an example, we are putting in place some regulation related, for example, to ensure that we protect customer funds. You all have mobile money in your different wallets here. So if you have them, it's because behind that there is a regulatory approach that has been put in place to make sure that your money is protected. We've also come up with different regulations that focus on security, which is very important, because without security, I think that trust will not be there. In terms of ensuring that internally we have strong internal controls to minimize any vulnerability that can be there, and also make sure that at least we can counter any external threat. But also, another part which is important, we are working with the industry, is to make sure, when we look at how the services are provided, there is a high, what I can say, high integration between service providers. You see MTN connected to banks, banks connected to different fintechs. So the way they connect, they integrate, they must do it wisely, taking into account that security aspect. Those are some of the regulation or guidelines that we have been putting in place to ensure that cyber security or cyber resilience measures are in place. But also we have come up with another regulation which is very important, which is related to protection of payment service users, where we enforce, because payment services is about contract. How do we enforce the contract? So if I want to proceed with a payment, I think Maurice said it, how do you make sure that that reliability and certainty of a payment order I've given is executed as should be? Or in case of any service denial, what kind of recourse mechanism in place? What procedures should we follow in terms of complaint from the service provider up to the regulator? So those are some of the actions that we have taken, but regulations are not enough as such, because the first part which is important is to make sure that we have product design that meet the consumer needs, and this is very important. That's why we've been working with the industry to make sure that the services we have here, we are able to integrate them under the interoperability project we have, so that someone paying to another can do it regardless of the place or the provider he belongs to. So this is something we are doing, and just to let you know that the interoperability we are implementing will be unique, because this will be the first one where MNOs, microfinance, SACCO banks will be linked together, and on top of that, even bring fintech who can leverage on that gateway to reach different payment accounts. So this will be really one of the interoperability or inclusive interoperability across the region. But again, another point which is very important is what we are doing here, because the trust also depends on how people understand and or are knowledgeable in terms of financial and the digital product. And this is what we are doing in terms of campaign. I know different banks have been also doing different marketing of their product, but this effort is also aiming at bringing us to make sure that we all understand what we are doing. When you're talking about cashless, we understand what it is. I'm happy that the communication experts, they have now made cashless as a Rwandan term. So maybe after this campaign, we will be asking every Rwandan if they understand really what cashless is. Otherwise, trust and confidence, that's really the key point that will help us to move with all Rwandans towards this cashless journey.
Okay, I was just
So
going
in
to
terms
mention
of, sorry?
I was just reading from the banner, the pull-up banner there.
Yes.
And I was wondering whether it was intentional to say cashless. So it's become a Kinyarwanda name.
Yes, so
So John, just let me ask you to just delve quickly into the issue of competition, the broader competition issues and data protection, as I mentioned,
yes,
so
of
that
course.
we can open the floor.
Yes, maybe I didn't go through all the details, but when you read that regulation on consumer protection, we also tackle issues related to data protection, data consent, Come back to the question you asked on how we work with other regulators. This is very important because when you look at how payment services are provided today, you find that we have across the value chain different intermediaries and who are, by the way, regulated by different authorities. So I give an example of mobile money, so we can't do it without RURA. We are also seeing new products that are also hybrid, part capital market, part payment. So we really need to work together, and we already have MOUs, and we work together regularly to make sure that from the entry point of a product and throughout the journey of the product, we are together to ensure that there is no any gray area or any duplication that can hinder the rollout of the product by different providers.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. Now, I think I need to open the debate to the audience. Hoping everyone is still awake. The breakfast was heavy, or the discussion is heavy? And before we just go in, I think I want to ask all the panelists as we come back. We want to ensure that the audience here will vote for either member here that will come up with the best slogan for this 6-month campaign. I know Central Bank has done its part, but I will just put you to task to come up with not more than 10-word slogan, under 10 words. So we'll vote for that as we can. Please start thinking. If you have any questions, I'm sure there's a microphone moving around, then we can entertain questions from other experts in the industry. Or if not, then we can just raise the curtain here and yes, please. Someone please bring the microphone forward for the Vice Governor.
I'm buying time for the others to come up with their questions.
Okay.
Thank you, panelists. This was interesting. Maybe let's really go deeper on this issue of trust, especially when people say, yeah, you can pay and then your transaction is kind of redirected to someone else, or someone steals money on your wallet account, or let's really be Damian's, on Damian's side, issues happening there. We know that for these frauds not to happen, you have really so many lines of defense. Like, I have to be careful not to share my password or my PIN or anything. But again, the service provider also has to have really very tight systems. And then the regulator enforcing the compliance and the standards and so on and so forth. But maybe I wanted just the industry, like MTN, like banks, and even a regulator. Can you comment on these governance issues around the frauds? Especially, how do we handle the super users who can, in the back of all of us, share our secret information and really make sure that someone else can intrude into our assets without us knowing, for instance? How do we do that? How really the governance around the frauds and the measures that the industry is taking really to make sure that we are in charge?
No, Monique, you're absolutely right, and I'll probably share the question with Maurice as service providers. I think we're seeing a lot of craftiness, around our fraudulent behavior. I mean, we've seen a lot of different types where, consumers are enticed to share their PINs, enticed to dial a particular string so that the money is redirected elsewhere. And what we've done, first of all, from a consumer perspective, is to try as much as possible to create a level of awareness around the importance of keeping your PIN secure, safe, and private. This is P1 for us. So in as much as you provide that PIN when you're transacting, and you're required to provide this PIN when registering, we try as much as possible to emphasize, please do not share that PIN beyond yourself to ensure that people are not able to access your account. The beauty about mobile is that if the phone is not on you and somebody else has it, once you have a secure and safe PIN, they're not able to access your account at all. In the event that you forget your PIN or you have misplaced your PIN, which we encourage not to do in terms of writing it down, we're also able to, through our service centers, which are across the country, through our agent footprint, able to reset those PINs, but only after you meet certain security criteria. So there's certain questions that you need to answer for you to be able to reset those PINs. So from a control perspective, from a consumer perspective, these are the things that we're doing. Internally, like I mentioned before, we hold ourselves to very high standards as far as security is concerned. So you'll find, for instance, even within the organization, it's not the entire organization that has access to these platforms. There's a specific team that has specific access controlled, which is auditable, et cetera, to ensure that customer information is also safe and secure. On top of that, like I mentioned, this environment, we're seeing a lot of permutations as to the various frauds that happen. We are also constantly subjecting ourselves to penetration tests, vulnerability tests, to ensure that we're moving with the times as far as the intelligence in the fraud environment is concerned. So you would have definitely our commitment, both internally to secure those platforms, but externally to continuously sensitize consumers as to the importance of keeping this information safe and secure. And where it is misplaced or forgotten, we also ensure that security questions, which at times consumers are not always happy with because they'd like, PINs to be reset very easily, but we also do that to protect and ensure that the person who's trying to access their account is actually the owner of it.
Thank you. You want to take that as well, Maurice? And just before you come in, I just want to allow the audience, you can please tweet and share far and wide. And please remember to use the hashtag #GoCashless. Maurice.
So maybe just an additional comment on that, because I think the real issue that Vice Governor is raising is what is causing the lack of trust, and what can we actually do to try and increase the level of trust. And it's a very difficult balance to achieve, because if you put it this way, that the more hardened your control systems become, chances are that the process also becomes very complicated, and therefore customers may not like it. I mean, there's definitely behavioral issues behind all that psychology around the collaboration between the service providers in obviously making sure that the internal systems are hardened enough from a security point of view, that the processes are in place and the systems are in place to detect and deter the occurrence of fraud, or if a transaction has failed, that it can be detected and corrected with as little pain as possible to the customer. But when you think about the behavioral side of it, which is again, internal to the service providers, because it's all good and nice to have all the PSS compliant systems and so on. But the behavior around risk management internally is not good. Then that creates loopholes already, because it is the application of the systems by the people who manage them that creates a level of confidence on the security of the systems. And so the two must go together. And I believe the service providers in this room are aware of that. The CEOs in this room know that. They're making investments, around the systems and the tools and the people as well, and instituting corrective mechanisms to ensure that the mistakes of yesterday become lessons for tomorrow in improving the experience of customers. But having said that, again, there's a lot of collaboration as well that needs to come into play, and one that I would possibly at this stage, bring to the mind of the regulator is that there needs to be a place where crimes in the digital world, can be punished severe enough for a lot of people who might want to attempt not to try. I imagine it is, we all experience the spam that goes around, people attempting to solicit PIN numbers and so on and so forth. Those numbers are registered with ISPs. Now, I always wonder, wouldn't there be a way that we can be able to actually track those numbers? The cost might look quite significant to track a single number, but it's a point around the fact that if you tried it, you will actually be found and you'll be prosecuted, and the law is stringent enough, for people not to try it, because then that deals with the behavioral side of why customers who use digital services may sometimes lose their money because of fraudsters that are present in the system. And they will always be there, because it is said that wherever there's money, there's always someone who wants it, and who wants it for free, regardless of how good or how hard or how great your systems are. But it's really about the collaboration of everybody, service providers, the security organs of government, the laws, that make sure that as far as we can go, that we create a behavioral system that makes sure that people do the right things, at least 98 or 99% of the time.
Thank you, Maurice. I hope the Vice Governor is satisfied with these responses.
I want to just add something small. Okay. I think the question raised by the Deputy Governor is very key, and what I can say from the experience we have, because every quarter we meet, as in the industry, we discuss all cases we have experienced in terms of fraud. So what we've seen, you can have a state-of-art system, but if you don't have proper internal controls, it won't be sufficient. And this is what we have seen, and most of the cases we are having, they are from insiders, either being someone who does it deliberately or is victim, by the way, of ignorance. So as long as we have people that are interacting with systems, we need to make sure that we educate our staff, but also we make sure that when it comes to fraud on all cases, we put in place proper monitoring system so that at least if there is anything abnormal, you can at least detect it as soon as possible. Another part, even the fraud we are seeing on the side of customers, you see that it's about ignorance. Either they have shared the PIN or they have colluded with an insider. So that's what we are seeing. So the sophisticated cases of hacks, we've not really seen that. So if we are able to resolve cases, the issues related to internal proper control, put in place proper control, I think we would have solved the problem at 80%.
I think that's a very valid one, again, and I'm glad she brought it up. Yeah. As we push this adoption of digital financial services, we should definitely brace ourselves for even a hike in potential such threats that will also come in digital format. If there are any questions, yes, Ms. Waringa.
Morning, I'm Waringa from EFR. Last week I attended a conference and I was actually given a business card that's also Braille enabled, which I was impressed. And I think Adeko mentioned it. I would just like the panelists, I know it's an area of development in DFS, but in our context, any of the panelists can tell us, how do you think within the service structure and the service provision we could carry along those with disability?
That's one question I remember Demi had mentioned, and I think I just want to remind that I didn't hear any other response from the issue around women. How do we have more women being included in the DFS? So again, homework for some of the panelists. Any other questions? Yes, we have one. The microphone to the front. Ah, you have one. Please proceed. Your name and your question.
My name is Jean-Claude. I have 4 comments or concerns. The first one is the availability or access to digital platform test beds, sandbox, and like for students, if we want to promote cashless in the future, we should even allow students in the university to have access to test environments. Like sometimes I supervise students at the university in IT department, but it's hard for students to work on USSD systems because whenever they approach like telecoms, they will be requested some questions and to pay some money. That's number one. So now the question here is, how are we facilitating young innovators or students in designing such cashless solutions for future? The second point is about the innovation barriers we are having. Whenever you come up with innovative solution and you are trying to sell it, the first question that will come out is, where have you implemented this? And there is no way you can implement such thing that is an innovative solution. So the third point is, how are we handling now claims? Myself, I had two challenges when I've been making online payments with Rwanda Revenue. I paid my taxes, but the bank system didn't synchronize with the Rwanda Revenue system. When I went to Rwanda Revenue and then I started saying, no, look, that is the statement, this is the reference number I have used to make the payment. What they will request you is, can you provide the hard copy, which you can't get. So the last point is now the auditing. When also it comes to auditors, I don't know whether something should be upgraded. Whenever auditors are coming in, the first thing they ask is the hard copy. You have made a payment, can I get a copy? Like this time, we can't make like online payments with mobile money for taxes because when it comes to auditing, then you have to provide a hard copy. When you pay school fees online, the finance guy from the school will ask you, can I have a copy? So how are we aligning these auditing techniques with online payments? So thank you so much. Those were my concerns.
Thank you. I would just request that probably, John, you take over the sandbox question. Then on the issue of how can we inspire these students to come up with innovative solutions, this can, again, go to the service providers. And the audit trail, again, feel free to pick it either as a regulator or as a service provider. The issue of hard copy, Bordero, I remember we had this issue some time back. I thought we had stopped asking for Bordero.
Minister of Finance is here, sir.
Okay, I'm sure Eric, even in his previous life, must have enough knowledge around these. Another round of questions, probably two more, then we can come to, yes, please, someone right there.
Thank you. I'm Gerard from Orissa. I want first to appreciate the partnership between the private and the public sectors in this journey of cashless. We also combine cashless and paperless. In this journey, indeed we are on the good track, but still having some challenges. I would address some challenges on the side of consumers, because most of the time they claim not to have a good service from the service providers, especially mobile banking. You see, consumers are now suffering on cost of service. If you know, most of you use mobile banking. When you withdraw, when you transfer, the cost is higher than money one. So I would like to address this issue on the telecoms. So, and especially MTN. It is good that you are new CEO. And this issue will be resolved soon. So, people are willing to use cashless, but the cost is still high. I think I'm not mistaken, and if I am, you can say anything about that. But I used to travel in rural areas, and really people are suffering from that. And we, in our policy, we need this strategy not to be used here in the cities, but also in the rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing up the pricing issue. I was hoping someone would. So now that you have, I can, liberate myself from also making the same points. And I think this is not just about the consumer. Let's look also at the merchants who are offering this service. How are we looking at the price factor, the MDR? Because this is something I remember even in the previous campaign by BNR that was cited as one of the hindrances to the adoption. So if we have one more, then we can. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Rohit. I'm representing Bank of Kigali. Elaborating on the question about the cost for transactions, how are we addressing the incentives for adopting the digital channels? It's not really the consumer, it's the providers and the agents in the middle as well, because everybody has a cost in this game. So how are we approaching the element of costs, the various requirements that are there? And it does put everybody in a difficult spot, because you want services for free, you would want to provide them for free, but there are costs associated with everything. So how do we arrive at that mechanism, if the panel can address that?
Great, so let's fall back to the team. I think if we can start with a question from Ms. Waringa on the visually impaired solutions. Any pointers? Are we going to see the next mobile phone, smartphone, getting mobile money services on such?
I think if we're completely honest, it's definitely, like you said, an area of development. I think one of the natural courses of action for us to ensure that people of seeing disability, et cetera, can access digital services is through, for instance, what we call the IVR. When you call the call center, you're given prompts to listen to, so you can transact over the phone. Have we matured into the environment where we're now seeing devices that are Braille enabled? Let us be honest and say no, but I definitely think it's an area of evolution that we as service providers should evolve into. And the beauty about where we're at in this journey around smartphones, I think particularly for Rwanda, is that we as service providers are seeing ourselves as responsible for building this ecosystem here today. We have a smartphone penetration in this country of just less than 20%, which is quite low. So it presents an opportunity to onboard some of these evolutionary things as far as enabling things like Braille on devices, because the ecosystem of device is only just being built now. So I think it's definitely an area of development that we should further look into. We've done the best that we can so far with voice-enabled prompts, but if we're completely honest around things like Braille, the things that are a bit more physical, there's a lot more work to do. Maybe if I can jump onto the question that the gentleman asked here around innovation, how do we carry the developers along, et cetera, et cetera. I'm so happy you asked that question, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about one of the projects that we're currently pursuing at MTN, which we're calling the Momo Api. And with this Momo API, we're going to be able to publish certain transactional features that developers from across the country, across borders, are able to take advantage of. We're in the process of ensuring that it's extremely safe and secure and foolproof to what would be hackers and things like that. So together with Rura and the central bank as well, before we actually come out and publish these APIs. And I think once we have these APIs that will allow people to create apps, because there are a lot of solutions that are being deployed in the markets today, but the reason why they have those challenges is because we don't have something that is published, so they have to physically contact us to enable those integrations. But once we have that published API, you literally don't have to knock on the CEO's door to say, give me a chance, let me publish my story. And I think with that API in place, maybe one of the things that we also could do, speaking off the top of my head as well, is that once we have this API in place, we'll be able to have developer fora where questions
to a sandbox. is because this is a sensitive area where if you want to introduce something, you have to make sure that at least you have exhausted all steps in terms of testing, developing, testing, until you develop your product. So that's a point which is very important. We've seen a new product in the market, but the only issue here is at least are you able to showcase that your product meets at least minimum security standard? Because if you can't just say that you are going to connect to an account payment service provider and bring the entire risk to the system. So what I want to say here, okay, the regulatory framework is there, but operationally, I think what we are still missing and what we are reading in the market is that the process of how we design, we test, we roll out our product, I think we still have some challenges there. And what I know already we have from the governments, there are some incubators that can support student or startup to at least go throughout that journey before they can bring the product to the market. Otherwise, even if it is a sandbox, it doesn't say that we are bringing the entire risk to the ecosystem. So it must be controlled somewhere. So that's what I can.
So you're simply saying they can come and see you, and you'll have a discussion around this?
No. The regulation is clear. The regulation is clear. But what I'm saying is the skills and the capacity we have on how we design, from the conception of the product, the testing, and how we roll out. We still have some challenges. So that's why I'm saying the problem is more operational than being
than regulatory. Okay. I think on the audit trail, we had an issue about disputed transactions, the bordereau issue, and how do we ensure that, we do away with this as government? I mean, you always give us, you pave the way, you trail you place the trail for most of these solutions. How can you make sure that we do away with this bordereau issue? When I pay school fees for my son or daughter, I'm not obliged to carry a piece of paper to go and prove that I actually made a payment.
Thank you, Gaga. No, first of all, so when you think about paying school fees, and who pays the school fees is the parent. Who receives the money is the bank. On behalf of who? Of the school. In between there's no government, right?
No, that was just one use case, but let's go to taxes.
No, I'm coming to that.
Okay.
So ideally, if you want to tackle that, let's look at the ecosystem. So I did something that was very interesting recently. So let me share experience, maybe it will be helpful. It has different perspectives. One is the issue of why we're here, teaching people, educating people, and creating awareness. I was able to pull money from my bank account and send it to pay school fees. When I did that, I actually shouted, like, wow, this is the journey we are heading to. Now, the school where my children go to, I never have to take the bordereau. But there's another person that I support who is in a higher class. For them, even after depositing the money, they want him to take the bordereau to the bursar's office, the accountant. So for me, on one side, it's beyond really the operational issues. It's about awareness. It's about creating teaching people on some of these issues. If you think about the journey that we have gone, we are registering in terms of paying fines for not respecting the road, the traffic laws, and that was the time that when you were asked to pay, and then you have to drive so many kilometers to go and pick your permit. That has disappeared, meaning that if you get the fine, automatically, digitally, you pay digitally, and no one will ask you to take it. So I think it's about how do we, especially service provider, how do we start enhancing our back-end processes and be able to allow them to communicate to users, which in one way create convenience. So if I have to go and line up to get the money or pay, but also I have to drive to take the bordereau, the customer experience is dying. So I think for me, that is one way of looking at it. But there's another interesting thing. So the issue of evidence for auditors, even government auditors, it is still, I think, for me, it's a discussion that's going on. For example, what the government and the lawmakers are trying to do, can we look at the way we can review the laws to be able to accept digital evidences? For example, where I think, if I remember very well, now emails are allowed to be used as evidence. If you look at the justice system in Rwanda, the trends are quite promising. So they no longer receive physical evidence in the courts. Probably time will come when even that changes. But I think for me, for auditors, it's more to do with the, at least from the government perspective, we are still, the auditors, the government auditors, I'm not sure about the private auditors, but the government auditors, they require real physical evidence. And that is partly because of the law that we have, which provides for such, including the National Treasury. They have to keep those hard copies. But I think for me, it's a trend. And I think the journey is quite promising. The only thing I want to encourage, I think, can we keep on picking these incidences and these cases and try to document them and start having a discussion on how we can deal with them. But my plea is that we should not use this a bit of sophisticated cases to even fail to do the simple one. Because I see people dressed like me and you still lining up in banks when the end of month to get cash. So I think what I wanted the moderator to request, that as we take stock of this bit of complicated use cases, can we first deal with the basics? The basics of just saying payment for fuel. I mean, we all know even if you pay for your gas, either cash or through digital means, already you pay for the service of using the card. But you go and get cash and also go and pay, but also you pay for that service that you have not even consumed. So I think it's a journey that for me I'm enjoying. In terms of the progress is good, but I think it will be very complicated if we mix the complicated one and the easy one that are within our means, and maybe that will help us to drive from 34 to about 60% that probably that will give us the economic returns and dividends that we are looking for.
Great. I think we still have one issue to address on the cost of service. But before I bring it in, I wanted to just hear from Damien, if you're satisfied with this. And if at all this is not the case, what else are you hearing from consumers? You're speaking for most of them here. What else are you hearing as the issues, besides what Jean-Claude just pointed out? And I advise you to please go ahead with your case, whether simple or sophisticated. Use Go Cashless and address it to the pertinent institution. So, Damien, are you happy with the answers you're getting here?
No, I'm not happy.
I thought so. Why?
Why? Because some complaints we receive at our office, some are related to prices, high prices. As Jean-Claude said, the price or the transaction, they charge by operation. Instead of charging, yes, they have to charge by operation, but they charge per amount. You see?
Give an example, please.
An example, for example, mobile money. A sender is charged, and also the receiver have to be charged. They have to charge, yes, If you send money, they charge you on mobile money. And also the receiver is also charged.
Maybe you mean when they want to cash out. They are not charged to receive. They are charged when they want to cash out. And so that's why probably we're saying cashless. Keep it
Yes,
on the phone and pay.
By transaction.
Okay.
Yes. If you want to transact, they charge.
Okay.
And when you send, they charge.
Okay.
Again, the MTN, telecommunication companies, they have to improve the internet connectivity. Because if we don't have a good internet, we cannot say cashless economy without internet, good internet. So they have also to increase telecommunication coverage, especially in rural area. They have to inform users on time and also be updated on new products. They have to bring those smart products closer to customers, because you will see some DFS are far to the user. So they have to bring closer to consumers. Cheaper, affordable, and accessible. Thank you.
Quite so many issues. You have to, please. Okay?
Yes.
So, Mitwa and Morris, what do you have to say about this? You're the people on the spot now.
In the hot seat, huh? Maybe to tackle the easier one first, around connectivity and coverage. You'll be happy to know, Damien, that over the last few months, we've increased our network coverage to covering now 93% of the population. If you go back 2-3 years ago, it wasn't the case. So it's a continuous journey for us to ensure that where there's population, there is coverage. And today, we're sitting at 93%, which a year ago was hovering around 90%. Our aim and our desire is obviously 100%, but it's a journey. We also have to balance the resources that we have versus the investment requirements that exist today. Internet connectivity, you're absolutely right. Today, mobile money is typically accessed via USSD, which doesn't require internet connectivity. But if we're really going to drive a holistic digital agenda, we do have to make, one, internet accessible, available, and like you rightly said, affordable. And for that reason also, from an infrastructure perspective, we recently modernized our network. So we almost doubled our internet speeds over the last 6 months. And you'll see a lot of continuous efforts in that environment. So rest assured that it's front and center of all the conversations that we have within the MNO space. And thankfully, we have also a regulator that has, very, very prominently spoken about the need for us to cover areas that are completely greenfield. So over the next 3 to 6 months, in collaboration with RURA, or probably you would have already heard, the talks around rural sites. And between ourselves, RURA, and the other MNO, you'll see, for instance, 30 sites coming up before the end of the year, where there was no site before. And this is massive. And the challenge that we have, and have truly accepted, is that where a site didn't exist before, we're not just going to go and plant a BTS site there. It is about holistically driving, how do you educate a consumer who didn't have connectivity before, how to use a device. And it's not just about using a device, but now how do they take advantage of all the services that they have through this device, whether it's mobile money, internet connectivity, et cetera, et cetera. So those efforts are there. And between ourselves, the other MNO in the country, our technology regulator, RURA, you will see a lot of efforts going into this environment. On the subject of price, and it's always a controversial one, but I'll share trends with you, and I think you've all experienced it as well. You're all customers of mobile operators, where typically prices do fall with time. So we can talk about voice, your call minutes, they don't cost as high as they used to a few years ago. If we talk data, I think in the last 1 year, we've almost halved our data prices through our bundled products, et cetera, et cetera. And you will continue to see the same trend also within mobile money. Now, I think the appeal that I would have, maybe not to the people in this panel, but people within the room who typically provide services, and I think the gentleman in the back also talked about how do we ensure merchant costs are also covered and things like that. But I think we have to tackle this issue of financial inclusion together. if it is going to place, if the burden is going to be placed solely on the mobile operator, we will potentially not get to that cashless environment that we want to get to. Now, we do know that there are costs associated with running this type of service. Whether it's from an infrastructure perspective, people behind it, sales team, creating an agent footprint, et cetera, et cetera. And as far as possible, we've tried to minimize the prices that consumers have to pay for this service to enable us to also maintain a secure, safe, reliable platform, et cetera, et cetera. The appeal that I wanted to make to anybody who is a merchant or a seller of a consumer good or service is that when consumers walk into your environments, whether it's a shop, a restaurant, you name it, we would have done our part to try and onboard mobile money pay merchants as far as possible. But if the person at the point of sale is not challenging the customer to say, you would like to pay, can you pay me rather through mobile money or pay me through another digital channel? We will possibly not succeed. And the challenge or the reason why, in my opinion, consumers are very conscious of the price that they pay for mobile money services is today that I mentioned that we have 20% of the population using mobile money. But 70% of those people are only using mobile money just to send money from person A to person B and eventually cash it out. We need to keep the money in the ecosystem. And you will find when you're paying for services through our various merchant channels, we actually don't charge the consumer. We don't. The person who is sending you money, yes, they'll be charged, it is a service, but as long as the money is kept within the ecosystem, you take that money, instead of cashing it out, you pay for fuel, as Eric mentioned, you buy bread, you buy milk, et cetera, then those costs are shared between ourselves and the merchant. The consumer is actually not touched. As far as our agents are concerned, I mentioned we have 30,000 agents across the country. You also have to make sure that the business that they're running is profitable. So you'll find all our incentives and our commission structures are benchmarked to the point where the level of investment that they have to make as far as device is concerned, et cetera, we try and ensure that we are supporting them as far as the commissions are paid to them.
Thank you. So in the less than 5 minutes that we are left with, I'll allow Maurice definitely to also make a few comments around this. But also remember my assignment. So let's close with that as your closing remarks. The under 10 word statements that you will be using in the next 6 months. So Maurice, please, if you may, then I'll move to Damien as we close.
Look, I think for the issue of cost, as Mitwa said, is two things. The good news is the cost of technology as it advances becomes cheaper. So that's wonderful. And so the more adoption of digital solutions in our day-to-day life, in times to come should definitely be cheaper. But the second point, and I think this is where we always have to strike the balance, is who pays the cost of the investment initially. I think it makes a lot of business sense for financial service providers and banks in particular to see it from the point that when the volumes build up in time, the unit cost of the service will come down. So in the initial stages, which is possibly where we are today, the per unit cost of a service today might seem higher than where customers would like it. But the more people we have in the ecosystem transacting on the digital platforms, the per unit cost will actually come down because it's about profitability. Remember, service providers are businesses just like any other. At the end of the day, the service providers have got to generate a return for their shareholders. And it's a balance between margin, which is price, and volume. And the more volume we get through the kind of initiatives that we are doing now, there's a very high likelihood that in the times ahead, the cost per transaction will actually come down without the service providers losing out on profitability. And I think that is something that we can all be optimistic about given the trends that we are seeing today.
Okay, 1 minute, John.
Yes. Again, this is what we are going to do in the next 6 months. It's about education. Dami was complaining about network. I think this year, in March, we had different complaints about point of sales. And when we did our survey, and we found that the problem was not even about the network, it was how the device is configured and how it must be used. Let me give you an example. If, for example, there is a network problem, the time the network just is recovered, the device is reconnected, it requires, for example, to restart the device. So you may find, for example, a merchant spending an entire day saying that the network is not up, yet maybe it's a problem of the devices. Those are some of the issues we have seen. The issue, for example, of making a difference between when we are making a payment and when we are making a transfer. I'm taking a case of MTN. They have, for example, the Momo Pay. So you see, for example, you're going to pay, and you pay like you are doing a transfer. And when you are doing a transfer, there is a cost. But doing a payment, we are not paying anything. So those are some of the issues we are seeing in the market, and I think during the next 6 months we'll be able really to educate people to understand the product we have. By the way, I know that some of you have even products that are free of charge for both consumers and merchant, but the public here is not aware. So I think this is what we are going in this purpose of the campaign we are running.
Absolutely. So it's more education, more awareness. Yeah. Again, let's close in the next 2 minutes. Damien, I said under 10 words, the message that you think will address this adoption that we are going into for DFS services. What would that be? And the audience will be the judge.
Okay, thank you. One is to increase product security, especially on transfers.
Sorry, Damien.
The established way to...
I'm just looking at a slogan.
Yes.
If it is something you have to say in one sentence.
In one
sentence that is less than 10 words.
In one sentence.
Yes, less than 10 words.
Consumers need data protection. Only
consumers
data protection.
Need data protection.
And also keep informed.
Okay, that's 9. So can you please repeat that?
Consumers need data protection and also to be informed.
Great, thank you. Next, can we have Victor your slogan?
Yeah, I think for me, maybe stealing from a very common African proverb, and I think echoing the appeal I made a few minutes ago, I wrote down, alone we will go fast, together we will go far, together we will go cashless.
How many words are those? Okay, we'll keep that.
Who's counting? Huh?
So, Maurice.
Okay, so our new world is cashless.
Our new world is cashless.
Our new world is cashless.
Great.
Yeah.
John?
Okay, I'm part of... yes.
Please don't use the central bank slogan.
I won't. Yes. What I can say, okay, cashless Rwanda by empowered consumers.
Thank you. And Eric?
For the next 6 months, I think my greeting will be, I'm cashless, how about you?
Interesting. So thank you, panelists. I think everybody is a winner here, going by the applause. So thank you again. I think the right one is go with the times, go cashless.
Yes.
So I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank the Central Bank for organizing this, and I want to thank everybody who made it here to be with us. And I want to thank all those that actually went an extra mile to share a tweet and pass on the message. So thank you. Let's go cashless.
Let's go cashless.
Thank you.
Another round of applause for our panelists. Let's all go cashless. That was a nice discussion. Some of the key takeaways are about security and protection, data protection, financial education, access, consumer protection, and other things that were raised. I hope we continue the discussion. You can tweet us, you can Facebook, Instagram us using our hashtag, which is #GoCashless, so we can keep the conversation going. And now allow me to invite the Honorable Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda for his closing remarks. Welcome, Governor.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I don't have much to say. Let me join you to thank the moderator, the panel that has been here, and the moderator, Gaga. I think we've had a very interesting discussion from the panelists. I really want to request you again to give them another round of applause. As we said, we are here to launch a campaign, and we are happy to be with the media among us, and so I encourage you and request you to make noise about this, and you are the channels we're using to reach many people. Though we're having a special press conference just immediately after this, but there's been a lot that has been said from the panel, and so we request you to really communicate the message. I liked the comment from the MTN CEO, where she said they're not fighting to have a bigger share of the cake, but trying to collaborate with others to enlarge the cake. And that's what we should all be fighting to achieve, working together to widen the network. And the bigger it is, the better for everybody. And I think here there's a challenge of the chicken and egg. Again, as Maurice said, the more people we have on board, the more transactions, the cheaper the prices or the costs could be, since we are benefiting from economies of scale. But how do we scale with the costs as a hindrance to people using mobile financial services? How do we balance the two? Because we, as service providers, will benefit if we have many users, because we are benefiting from the economies of scale. But how do we, through the value chain, as said by the gentleman from BK, how do we allow less or incur bigger costs today to build the network, to bring many people on board, and then enjoy the benefits of economies of scale later? So there is really, that's a challenge to the service providers to try and build and balance the two. Again, as said from the beginning, this is a campaign, and so we, as I said earlier, we want to be reaching the consumers on the ground, and I call upon the service providers, and by the way, everybody that is in this room has a bigger role to play in promoting the cashless campaign in Rwanda. So I really encourage you, the service providers, to go further down to the population. I think John talked of products that are already there, that are really good products, but they are not being used because people don't know about these products, and people just have that issue of trust and fear. So we need to work together to go directly to the ground and engage the population and bring them on board. So we count on working with you, financial institutions, the telcos, and the other fintech providers to really educate our population and create that trust and have a mass movement of people willing to use the non-cash means. So as I said, I'm convinced this is achievable. Eric just shared us his experience of using cashless means. I can tell you, I think for the last 3 years, I haven't used my checkbook at all. I rarely use any cash. I know because of the costs, I said, the telcos have gained a lot from my transactions. But I really use my phone and my computer, and that's it. And I make a lot of transfers. But unfortunately, because the money we transfer to individuals, they have to cash it out. You're always told, please add the cost for my withdrawal. So I really want us to, as we send the money to these individuals, the individuals can use it to buy goods and services without having to cash it out. So let's work together to build that network. So once again, thank you so much for being with us today, but more so, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us in this journey to promote a cashless Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. And with that, we have come to the end of our breakfast meeting. Thank you for everyone who came in and participated. We really appreciate. And for the media in the house, I would like to let you know that we are going to start a press conference right after we have our guests leave. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.